is like where I sound like a real fucking conspiracy theorist, but you can look all the stuff up that actually happened. So, post World War II, FDR had this realization towards the end of World War II and he admitted this. He spoke to Churchill. He said to Churchill, "We fought the wrong enemy," in regards to the Nazis, right? He said, "We should have been fighting the Soviets. Those were the ones. We should not have aided them. We should have been fighting them." And for the most part, Winston Churchill agreed. So Winston Churchill decided to send to kind of fund a little bit of the beginning stages of the OSS, which eventually turned into the CIA. But he funded some of that. He said he gave a little bit of money to it. And the OSS went to two other operators, independent operators in Italy, because the partisans, who were essentially communists, wanted more than anything. They were popular. They would have became a communist stronghold post World War II because they were responsible specifically for the assassination of Mussolini. They were the guys that hung him up. Right? They were the fucking cool kids in town. They were the guys that were fucking making moves. Because of that, they were set to fucking actually take over, the government. There are two independent operators in Italy that did not want that to happen. And the first was the Vatican. Because the Vatican didn't want to be surrounded by communists. Because the Vatican feared that they would actually reappropriate the Vatican from the Vatican. They would take all of that wealth and redistribute it. They didn't want that. They said, fuck all that noise, right? The second operators were the Italian mafia, the actual real mafia. They did not want to deal with that because their import-export business would now be fucking completely decimated and taken over by communists, by Italian communists. They did not want that. So the OSS went and reached out to the Vatican and said, hey, we have all of this, we need to hide all of this money, or we need money so we can buy arms and create small groups, stay behind operations. So people who can, at Gladio, create some kind of essentially kind of I think was a propaganda unit, and I don't know, I don't doing any actual real arming shit, but that's what they were doing. They were arming people and creating militias and how it gets so the Vatican and the fucking the mafia get involved, but it gets how that translates into South America is that the OSS, which is now I think in post 70s or post 60s, it's now the CIA. They need money. They're out. They ran out of money. They're completely running out of money. So they need an operation to make money. Well, a CIA agent who was originally, or I think it was either an agent or an asset, but he was originally a British asset for whatever the British intelligence service was, and he was actually helping bring opium into China to fund sabotage raids against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. So he was working with the Nazis, but in a really weird fucking. Anyways, he knew the opium routes. He knew how to get opium in and out of China, and he decided if the CIA needs money, there's always money in opium. And the CIA said, yeah, that works, but here's the thing: where do we sell it? Because we can't, because the Vatican doesn't want it in Italy, and our allies are most of Europe, with the exception, and it's not going to get up into Russia. They're not taking it, so what do we do with it? And so he had the idea of, why don't we sell it in America? And at first they were absolutely not. And he said, okay, but what if we sold it to the black communities in America, to the inner cities in America, right? And they did, and they were very fucking good at it. And if you look at all of the in I think the 30s and not the 40s, 40s and the 50s, you look at Billie Holiday, you look at all of these fucking great jazz musicians, they're completely hooked on fucking heroin, right? In fact, it was a decimation of the black community through heroin, and it started it was literally all of the money that they were paying those guys was going to the mafia, who was smuggling all of that in. The Italian mafia was leveraging their connections with the American mafia, Lucky Luciano. He was a big trafficker of heroin and all that stuff. He was bringing them on board and trafficking into the inner cities, and he was making them incredibly rich, and they were, all of that money that they were taking, they were sending it back to Italy, and they were arming these fronts. So well, the Italian mafia and the communists do not get along at all, which is really confusing when you start getting into like labor movements in America, right? Because labor movements were essentially socialist, but they were not communist. And so like you have like Jimmy Hoffa, who was a fucking, hey, I'm a socialist, and then people's like, oh, you're a fucking communist, and he was like, no, fuck you, I work with the mafia. Essentially, what ends up happening is America runs into the same problem again, which is we need to fight the communists in Pakistan, in Iran, in fucking Afghanistan. We need to fight the Soviets moving into there and arming and collectivizing. What they were doing is they were collectivizing against Saudi oil expansion, which was created by the British Empire. The British Empire gave the Saudis the ability to actually, consolidate their oil fields and start expanding. And if Russia had not interfered, like Saudi Arabia or like Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, that would all just be Saudi. Those would just be Saudi oil fields. That would just be a gigantic republic of Saudi Arabia, right? Russia interfering with that and getting tribesmen together to fucking band against, like the rapid expansion of Saudi oil and what is it called? Not frontierism, but it's when you enclosure, when you just build a fence and then that's yours, right? Which goes back to like feudalism in the British Empire. What I'm getting at is that America ran into the same problem. They needed more money, so they decided that their Operation Gladio, which was to sell heroin, was a great fucking way to make money. But at the time, the heroin was out of fashion. Heroin was something that not many people were fucking doing anymore. It was not interesting. This is like the 80s, right? This is the late 70s, early 80s. They realized that there was an incredible product from south of the border, found in Bolivia, Colombia, I think in parts of Argentina, and Nicaragua, right? And so they took, the CIA went down and took these local squabbling kingpins, nautical kingpins, cartels that were fighting with each other. They took those guys and decided, hey, why don't we help you guys work together and we'll all get rich together? And they were just kind of like, well, what the fuck do the Americans? And so, well, the Americans want it. And if the Americans want it, they'll buy it. And if they buy it, then they pay us. And if they pay us, we'll pay you. And don't worry about what we're doing with the rest of our money, because America always needs money. And that's literally how they got all those guys on board. So the CIA decided that what was happening was the OPSEC of these cartels and these like warlords and these drug production markets, these nautical production markets, the OPSEC of them was not good enough for the CIA, right? It was not. It was there was like really high shrinkage. People were getting high on the job. They were stealing shit. They're fucking a bunch of like local farmers and stuff. None of them were trained in any kind of like security. So the Americans decided, hey, we'll train you guys in OPSEC. We'll train you guys on how to fucking tighten security around here. And so what they did was they took these guys and they showed them not only how to like smuggle guns in and out of countries, how to finance this shit, how to hide your money in the Bahamas, which became, so what happened was the Vatican was the main source of a way to hide your money, and the Bahamas became the second. And in fact, the mafia was deeply connected to, like pre-60s, before the rise of Castro, the mafia was moving into Havana, Cuba to turn it into a Las Vegas part 2, like an island Las Vegas, and that was actually purely to launder money. The whole concept of it was to launder heroin money, and they were eventually planning on doing cocaine money as well, but they, Castro fucked all that up. So the rest of the Bahamas actually became how they started fucking, and Panama became how they started hiding their money. The Americans decided to start something called the School of Americas. And the School of Americas was the CIA teaching people not only how to torture and how to get information out of your torture victims, but also how to resist getting tortured, right? If you were to get captured by Sandinistas or anything else. And a lot of how they convinced these men to get tortured willingly was the idea that if they're tortured willingly, or if they give, these men are not allowed to have wives, these men are not allowed to have children, these men are not allowed to have lives. They live their lives for their country because they love their country, right? And they love their country more than they love themselves. And that's how they not trick them, but that's how they program these guys. They build these guys to be like these machines where you can peel their fingernails off, you can shock their genitals, you can violate them sexually, you can do whatever you want to these guys, and they'll never break, because at the end of the day, they love their country more than they love anything else. Now, it flipped. Sometimes, every now and then, what would happen is some of these School of America guys would actually be for the Sandinistas, and that's how, especially in Nicaragua, how it got so bloody, right? And there are accounts of like these things and this is what's fucking crazy to me. All these guys that did all this stuff in the 80s are still to this day, they're still in the American government. But most of the people that were involved in the Iran-Contras and the Nicaraguan, the like massacre of Nicaragua and the massacre of fucking Colombia and like all these awful drug wars and fucking just straight up, I would call it a drug genocide, right? It's a Latino drug genocide. Are not only still in the government today, but they're actually they got promotions for it. They're paradigms of Western thought. People think of these people as geniuses. That's the top. That's to be that those guys are untouchable. Where you need conspiracy analysis, because if you look at the Taliban, you look at 9/11, you look at all of these fucking things that don't seem interconnected, they are interconnected by the CIA, right? And the fact, when you say stuff like that, it makes you sound crazy. It makes you sound like fucking Alex Jones. And the reason it makes you sound like Alex Jones is that's by design. They do that so that way you cannot actually talk about these things in a critical manner. You cannot be critical of this stuff without sounding like a complete fucking nut job. And it's what I said earlier, a wilderness of mirrors. You're constantly finding yourself not being able to point in any direction, because that direction either points back to you or points at a completely different direction. Like, if you were to just think about it logically, what the fuck does 9/11 have to do with communists in 1945 in Italy, right? Yeah, what the fuck does the Vatican have to do with the bank of BCCI, the bank, which is a Pakistani bank which helped fund fucking the Iran-Contras, which eventually led to the conflict in Afghanistan, which eventually led to Osama bin Laden bombing, or ordering the bombing of the Twin Towers, right? Which actually also ties into the Surna brothers who did the Boston bombing. Like, what do the Chechens have to do with this? What does Gulen, was that fucking guy's name? Something, Fethullah Gulen from Syria and Assad. What do they have to fucking do with anything? What does Slobodan Milosevic have to do with fucking anything of this stuff? And it makes you feel like a fucking crazy person. It makes you feel schizophrenic, and that is by design, right? It's all meant to obfuscate the simple fact that the American machine, right? The American the CIA is both a conspiracy mill, but it's also the protector of the real America. Because to them, the real America is American business interest, right? They are not operating on the whim that Americans need protection from the outside world. That's not how they're operating. Instead, what they're doing is they're infiltrating. They're like an octopus. They're all over the world, doing what is best to make sure that American business interests stay at the top level, the top tier, right? 60% of Americans love the CIA. That's horrifying, because none of them actually know what the CIA does. They know they did a bunch of wacky stuff in the 60s, like spike people's drinks with LSD and stuff, and to them it seems like fun stories. But the reality of what they were doing was either they were doing an amazing fucking version of like seeing ahead 30 years and doing PR, or what they were actually doing was they were actually trying to figure out if you can actually break reality. If you can get people to expand their consciousness to a point where madness takes hold, or not madness, but like if you get enough people to break from reality, can you get a separate kind of reality, which is what liberals live in. None of what happens here happens in a bubble, right? No operations happen in a bubble. And in fact, I would even argue that no operations officially end. They continue going on in a different way, right? Maybe they change the nature of how they operate, but they never truly end, right? Like, you hear the story, what is that movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats? Where the CIA was trying to get people to use mind powers and stuff like that. And so they were doing all this weird hippie stuff. I don't think they changed that. I don't think that I don't think that that's something that they stopped doing. In fact, I would say what they did instead was realize that the way to do it is technologically. Alright, School of Americas. It got rebranded, actually, subject to rebranding. So now it's called the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. So it happened in 1946. The United States Army founded the Latin American Training Center Ground Division at Fort Amador in the Panama Canal Zone to centralize the administrative tasks involved in training increasing number of Latin Americans attending the U.S. service schools in the Canal Zone. The school trained Latin American military personnel to use artillery and advanced weapons purchased from the United States and provided instruction in nation building, which is code word for how to start criminal organized crime, essentially. Nation building is always, you have to understand, the term nation building is essentially how to transfer communal wealth, commonly held land and infrastructure, and privatize it. In fact, the Nazis had a term for it called reprivatisation, or something like that, reprivatization in German. And the idea behind it is that to take communal like lands held in common, like so, like in a feudal society, right? If you're in like in the slow merge from feudalism to capitalism in England, for instance, what the lords did was all land was communal land, which meant that you worked on it. There wasn't real like ownership of land. You just kind of worked it. You made your whatever you grew, you gave a share to the lord, right? So that's how feudalism works. Well, how feudalism transitions to capitalism is those lords decided to build fences around land and say, this land is now my land, and if you want it, you either have to A, buy it off of me, or B, rent it from me. And so it's something that went from being like completely, like nearly free to being something that is now pay to play. And so nation building at its core is about the idea of taking things that are held in common, which is like, you know, the jungles in Nicaragua, or the fucking where the steppes where they grow all of the fucking all of the agriculture out there. I can't remember what it's called. It was like a plateau flatland. In 1950, I think, the Nicaraguan government decided to just seize it and say, no, this is our land now, and if you want to fucking, you can buy it. You can buy it off of us. And how they did that in the 50s is they were trained in the 40s by the Americans. The Americans showed them how to do that, right? And going to like so they just fucking, they taught people how to fucking murder, torture, kill peasants and commoners. And Nicaragua was their testing ground of like how they fucking, it was the most brutal testing ground, right? It was one of the more brutal schools of, not because in Panama, but it was a more brutal testing grounds of what actually worked. And to this day, Nicaragua is still in like tumbles. It's actually getting out now. It's getting a little bit better, but not by much. And a lot of that has to do, and in fact, like Venezuela, and its current, like, it had a run in the news for a while, what, 10, 15 news cycles ago, or a while ago, right? Like, it had a run in the news, and the run in the news was purely about how socialism can't work because look at Venezuela. But if you actually take a look at Venezuela, what you're seeing is a lot of American interference and influence peddling within fucking meddling. What American liberals are obsessed with Russians doing currently here in America, they're talking about they're doing it in real life.
Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, a tyrant who brutalizes his people, but Maduro's grip on tyranny will be smashed and broken. Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to your family.
Hopefully you can't see it. It looks like the School of Americas, even though it does have an ominous fucking tonation to it, it's purely because we know enough about that. Because if you were to sell that outside. If you were to say the School of Americas is actually, it sounds like, well, they're trying to show people how to nation build. When you say things like nation build, it has a positive spin to it, and that's why it's built that way. Yeah, how America gets, or how the CIA effectively gets people to turn against their own countries and work for them and normalize the working for them, and is sort of the propagation of the American dream, right? The idea that you individually work hard enough to deserve a better life in America. The biggest threat, I would say, the biggest threat to like international communism, or not communism, but the international like workers movement, or created and propagated by America, right, and utilized by the CIA, utilized by them, right? It's a CIA tactic to go to another country and say, hey, you're a go-getting motherfucker. How would you like to run drugs for America and make tons of money, right?
The young man who was trafficking in drugs in South Central Los Angeles that were being sold to him by Mr. Norman Meneses and Mr. Danilo Vandone. Still had documented that the CIA directed this drug trafficking operation out of 2 hangars using Contra Supply Network as a route for shipping drugs into the United States. LAPD officer Mike Rupert, who states he was forced to leave the LAPD after he uncovered a connection between the CIA and narcotic trafficking operations in California and Louisiana after being convicted of smuggling 704 kilos of cocaine with his partner Norman Meneses worked for the Contras, and that his drug trafficking operation had the support of the CIA. And passing on the funds to support Contra groups who were connected to Carlos Lederer, a Colombian drug dealer and co-founder of the Medellin cartel. It was through Lederer's private island that the Medellin cartel moved massive amounts of cocaine to Miami and the United States.
I did not know at that time that there was any money involved.